Voters in 2016, 63 million of them, preferred an authentic bad boy to a disingenuous good girl. Explain that.
Well, Trump was what he was, and he had no pretensions that he wasn't. So when he went to Fresno, he went to Tulare, California, he went to Maine, he went to Alabama, he had on the same jacket, the same weird tie, the hair, everything. When Hillary did it, it was you all down in Alabama, and then she had a Harvard accent. When Obama campaigned, he had an inner city patois. As I mentioned, John Kerry put on duck gear when he went duck hunting. Mike Dukakis put on the helmet, remember?
Yes.
But he didn't. And that
Trump was always the businessman from Queens.
Queens accent wherever he was. And the other thing about him was he had a strange way that nobody detected except the people who voted for him of conveying empathy. So he said our, not
our
you.
Country.
Our vets, our workers, our farmers. I can't imagine Mitt Romney or John McCain, who are supposed to be far more empathetic. And he went to West Virginia. I love big, beautiful coal. Contrast that with, remember what Hillary Clinton said, I'm going to put you out of work and shut down the industry. Obama had said the same thing. So there was a way that he connected with the deplorables, the clingers, the irredeemables, what John McCain called the crazies, in a way that we didn't really expect that he would, given his background.
Mm-hmm. And then, so there's the personal authenticity, but you also draw out his agenda. Again, I'm quoting the case for Trump. They, the 63 million people who voted for him, also preferred his agenda, which represented, quote, the antithesis to the Democratic Party of Barack Obama, which was increasingly candid in voicing socialist bromides.
Yeah.
So it's there are moments when I think that all politics comes down to that old Henny Youngman gag. How's your wife? Answer compared to what?
Yeah.
So Trump comes across as authentic. Somehow or other, this guy from Queens, this billionaire from Queens, seems to be what he is. There's an authenticity that appeals to people in the middle of the country, and at the same time, the alternative is getting just unacceptable to us, right? That's the argument?
That's the argument. And what we're seeing now with permissible infanticide or reparations or a Green Deal or a wealth tax or 70% income tax or Medicare for everybody or cancellation of everything. Let's cancel Electoral College. Let's cancel ICE. Let's cancel all student debt. All of that stuff is a logical trajectory from the Obama administration. He was the one that took the party. Remember when he was elected, he had the most partisan record in the U.S. Senate. So that's the antithesis to Trump. It was with Hillary. It's even going to be more so in 2020. And then he did something that nobody quite has analyzed. His agenda wasn't some crazy alt-right. It was an 80% traditional Republicanism.
Yes.
Deregulation, lower taxes, repeal Obamacare, good judges, strict constructionists. What was new, he looked at that Electoral College and he tweaked 4 or 5 issues that the other 16 may have been for, but they didn't do it. And that was, you can't have a sovereign nation with an open border.
Right.
You can't have immigration unless it's legal, measured, meritocratic, and diverse. That was a winning issue for those states. Then he said, if you're going to go overseas, translate tactical success into strategic advantage. It doesn't help you if you bomb Libya or Gaddafi out of power, or you're bombing people in Afghanistan if it's not resolved in our interest. And then he said, China's not fated to take over the world. They're not the Superman. They have a smaller economy. They've got all sorts of problems. They are only strong because they're asymmetrical in their trade, and we'll fix it. And finally, he said, you don't need a magic wand to restore the interior. It's not, remember Obama said, these jobs are never coming back. He said they're not only going to come back, they're going to come back right away. And in large part, that was true. So that was a new message, but he wasn't the Antichrist Republican. He was a traditional Republican that took some issues, incorporated them within Republicanism, and then looked at Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, and said, you didn't come out for John McCain or Mitt Romney because there was something missing in this menu, and I'm going to be the person who puts it back in. And then finally, one time,
Sure.
it was the messenger too. Because he was basically saying, I'm crude and crass, getting back to your quote at the beginning of our conversation. But he said, I'm not playing by the Marquess of Queensberry rules. If Candy Crawl, I'm ad-libbing here, but if Candy Crawley in the second debate tries to hijack
Second debate with Mitt Romney.
yes,
Right.
when she said, no, Governor Romney, Barack Obama's correct here, he would have grabbed the mic like Reagan did.
Right.
And he's not going to say, as John McCain did, I just don't want to mention Reverend Wright. So Trump was saying, I'm going to fight, there's going to be a war room, I'm going to go after the left as they go after us. Mm-hmm. And nobody had seen that since Lee Atwater in 1988, with the tank commercial, the Willie Horton commercial,
Right.
the Boston.
When George Bush is running for re-election,
Yes.
or running for election in 1988 to succeed
and so
Reagan.
that was part. I'm not condoning it, or I'm not excusing it, or I'm not praising it. I'm just saying that at this point, a lot of people would come out of the woodwork, conservative Reagan Democrats, Perot voters, I don't know what we call them, Tea Party, if they thought somebody really wanted to win and that they wouldn't get out ahead of the candidate. There was a lot of people said, oh, if I support a Republican candidate, they'll know no sooner do I do it than they say, you shouldn't say that. Oh, you're too uncouth. Let's work across the aisle. Then the supporter has got the limb sawed off. McCain did that a lot to people.
Trump was a fighter.
Yes.
But Ted Cruz was also a fighter.
He was.
How did Trump defeat Cruz? What did he have on Cruz?
Well,
Cruz was the last man standing in the
Yeah.
fight for the nomination, too. He was the last man that Trump defeated.
And that's not an accident. So the two people of that 17-person field that
Right.
were, as you're suggesting, who were the most combative and wanted to take the argument to the enemy, so theoretically, I don't mean actual enemy, but to the adversaries were Cruz and Trump. But
Right.
the difference was Trump was a professional reality TV star. He made his money in repartee. Remember I'll give you an example. The first debate, Rand Paul, there's certain things I like about Rand Paul,
Sure.
but he said, you're the nexus, basically. I'm paraphrasing. You're the nexus between money and influence.
He said that to Trump.
Yes.
Right.
And Trump looked around and thought, how do I get out of this one?
Right.
And he said, yes, I am. And you came up to my office and I wrote you out a check for $10,000 and we got along perfectly after that. Ted Cruz would have not said that. But that's what Trump, because you don't really say that about somebody. And he's basically saying to Rand Paul, you did something as unethically as I did. When you're supposed to say neither one of us would ever do anything unethically.
Right.
But Trump was, this is a guy who actually wrestled in a wrestling mat,
Yes.
And so his idea was, there's nothing I can do that is going to embarrass me. And that was baked into his support with his voters.
Now, he was raised in Queens,
Yeah.
but he was raised in a pretty wealthy enclave in Queens.
Yes.
And so there are a couple of mysteries here with Donald Trump. His parents were wealthy.
Yeah.
As he was, from the moment he was born, it's not as if they made the money as he was growing up.
you're absolutely
right. He
right.
was born into a rich family. He went to an Ivy League school.
Yeah.
He had one chance after another to turn himself into a pinstripe-wearing,
Yeah.
wingtip shoe-wearing, very urbane, polished, rich man in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And he did turn himself into a rich man in Manhattan. He took his father's real estate empire and continued it and put up buildings before he went into the casinos and then before he went into television. He was a builder. But he was always the guy from Queens. And somehow or other, how does a rich kid from Queens, which is what he is, a rich kid from New York, identify with the grandson of a welder in Bakersfield?
Because he was always an outsider, and he wanted it to be successful. And he found out very quickly that he could build a skating rink in Central Park, or he could redo a hotel, but he was never going to be fully accepted, given the way that his father was kind of shady, they thought, a Manhattanite would say. He wasn't a premier builder. He had a lot of tenants, apartment buildings of poor people, that accent, outer borough. And then the second thing is that he was a builder. He didn't make his money. If we look at the top 20 fortunes in America, I would imagine 75% of them are high finance, media, and high tech. He actually built things. So that meant that he needed to work with unions. He needed to know who the cement workers were, the tilers, the carpenters, the electricians. And people would say that he would, as he walked around, he actually liked those people because he understood that he couldn't do what he does without them. And I think there was an empathy for those people in a way. At least he could talk to them. Whether he was sincere or not, I don't know. But I do know that he developed an ease of being able to communicate with people from all different classes, and that they did like him. I talked to a New Yorker, pretty important person, I guess. I asked him, if you had an A to F list in New York, and they'd probably do, where would the Trumps be? And it would be
F. Right.
D, E.
Not an A lister.
And I don't think he would. He may have been hurt by that, but I don't think ultimately he'd care.
Okay.
So he was an outsider. And he felt that the East Coast, West Coast, globalized coastal elite were talking to themselves. They had a certain Marquess of Queensberry rules, Republican, of acting and campaigning. And people in the middle said, you can be amoral and be sober and judicious. It's not very moral to have no 3% GDP for over a decade.
Right.
It's not very moral to go overseas and take us and not translate that optional intervention into a strategic victory. It's not very moral to have high minority unemployment. And he hit on something. I don't think it doesn't mean you're going to be crass and you're a good leader, but he was just saying the two greatest people that we know as far as their sterling characters are probably Jimmy Carter and Jerry Ford back to back.
And they were fine men and ineffective presidents.
Yes.
All right.
It doesn't mean that there's a connection, but it does show you don't have to be a saint to be an effective leader.
At home, the economy in Trump's first 600 days was better than at any time in the last decade. Massive deregulation, stepped up energy production, tax cuts, and talking up the American brand produced an economic upswing as evidenced by gross domestic product growth, a roaring stock market, and record low unemployment. So, two things to be observed about that. One is that's a very compelling domestic record.
Yeah.
And the second is that's completely conventional Republican or conservative politics.
I think it is. A lot of it is. Except for we don't know the effects because he hasn't lowered the trade deficit, but he's put allies, rivals, and I should say enemies on notice that they're going to have to reduce their trade surpluses and trade reciprocally.
Okay, so and now foreign policy, again the case for Trump.
Yeah.
Abroad, monthly incidents of Iranian hazing of U.S. forces, which were going on in the previous administration, have remained non-existent under Trump.
They're non-existent in the Straits of Hormuz. They're not trying to shoot missiles at a carrier, or they're not trying to cut in front of a destroyer, or they're not trying to hijack a boat. So the question is why?
Because they're scared of this guy.
Because
they
he's
think he means business.
Because he's unpredictable, and they have no idea what he's going to do. If tomorrow Secretary John Bolton calls up Donald Trump and says the Iranians just shot a missile right across the bow of the George Bush. The carrier. I don't know what he would do. You don't know what he would do.
And neither do they.
And they don't know. And so all the things he's criticized in foreign policy of being unpredictable, unpredictability is an advantage in diplomacy.
North Korea?
Well, I mean, I was taken back when he said Little Rocket Man, but then if you read those serial ghostwritten Art of the Deal books, it is to act unconventional, to scream and yell, but always to have in the back of your mind that you're going to ask for 70, 80, 90% of a deal, then take 55, and then praise your interlocutor. So no sooner did he do Little Rocket Man than he was saying he wrote a love letter to me and he's a great guy, and the left went nuts. They hated him when he used Little Rocket Man. They hated him when he said Kim Jong-un was a good guy. But what they didn't get is that's how Trump tries to deal, to be unpredictable, to go back and forth. But the real question is, have they curtailed their testing of missiles and nuclear devices? I think they have.
And they have.